Afternoon off with a land acknowledgement, and I know we did offer this at the beginning during our opening ceremonies, but we've adjusted our language a little bit because we realized we were centering ourselves as white folks. So I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the native homeland of the indigenous Algonquian-speaking tribes, including the Lenape, the Miami, and the Shawnee tribes. And I would encourage all of you to do some investigation into who was on this land before you or your ancestors got here, and to make sure. I took away with me from Rose's talk on Wednesday night to think about what a gift it is to all be here together right now and in the present, and sharing this moment and being on this land. And I also, shucks, I forgot my notes. I'm going to introduce Paul and James, and it's going to be really abbreviated because I'm not going to give you their history except for my own experiences of their lives. Sorry, guys. I also want, before I introduce Paul and James, I want to encourage everybody in the audience, if you could please, if you have a question, could you step either to this microphone that I'm modeling right now, or that lovely microphone over there? Yeah. And the reason for this is we are recording this for posterity, and if you don't speak into a microphone, we won't capture your question, okay? So with that, I am very honored to introduce James Watkins, and I'm not going to read you his CV from my piece of paper, but I'm going to tell you that I first met James in 2012 when I was a resident artist at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and he was being honored that year as a Texas Master Craftsman. And I got a chance to speak with James, and I haven't seen him in over a decade. And when I ran into him Wednesday, he remembered me, just like it was yesterday. Really impressed. He's got his double-walled vessels that he's going to be working on and hopefully completing today for you. And with James on stage today, we have Paul Andrew Wandless. I first met Paul also in 2011, when I was a graduate student and I was at Penland Center for Crafts in North Carolina. And Paul was doing much of what he's going to show you today. He was doing a print on clay extravaganza with Kathy King. And I met Paul, and we have remained in touch on and off over the years for decade and a half now. And I just have to say that I am so excited to bring these two gentlemen to you today to share what they are doing. And with that, let's all give them a big round welcome and let them take it away.
Thank you. So we're going to get started.
What you're going to do.
Are there new people that were not here yesterday? Raise your hands. Okay, good. We have one story, and so we're going to be telling stories that we told yesterday. So.
I got a couple fresh ones.
Okay, good. So I started this yesterday. It's a double wall form, and this is going to be a single wall form. We have 3 hours. I don't know if we'll be able, how far we'll be able to go, but I'll be able to talk about them and tell you why I'm doing them and what they're all about. The double wall forms I've been doing for a while. The new forms, I call them the anthropomorphic forms, and I have one of those in the exhibition at the Western Gallery, which is about 2.5 blocks from here. And they are large, voluminous, voluptuous forms that are reminiscent or in reference to in honor of my grandmother and mother. They're beautiful, voluptuous forms, and I'm dressing them up with gold and sandblasting them, and they're very beautiful. And then these are cauldron forms. They're double walled, they're hollow on the inside, and their reference to cast iron vessels that my mother and grandmother used to make hominy and souse, which is a kind of a meatloaf that they make in the South. Anybody familiar with souse? Yeah. They also call it head cheese in the North. Anybody familiar with head cheese? They make it from the scraps of pigs, and it's very fattening, but it's delicious. And they take all the parts that you throw away from the pig, not the guts, but the pig feet, the head and ears and all like that, and they boil it and boil it and boil it and boil it until all the meat falls off, and they put sage and all kinds of spices, and then they strain it through a screen and get all the gristle or some of the gristle and all the bones out. And then they pack it and cool it off, and you slice it into a meat, and it's very good. And then they would make hominy. And my mother and grandmother, they knew the secret to how to do all of this stuff. But to make hominy, they would take dried corn, and they would take ashes, and if you mix water and ash together, it makes lye. So they knew how to take the ashes and put it on a sock, and she would use hickory ashes because that gave it the best flavor. And you'd boil it and put it, anybody know this, how to do this kind of thing? And they would boil it and boil it and boil it, and the husk on the corn, the dry corn, would peel off and float to the top, and it would make the corn soft. And they put seasoning in it, and that's what hominy is made out of. And then they would make lard. And then you make lard out of the fat of pigs, and from that they would make soap. They make soap from fat. Did anybody see Fight Club, the old movie? And they would take liposuction and make fat, make soap out of liposuction. So they knew how to do all of this stuff, and I thought they were magic. I thought they were alchemists. They knew how to do all this stuff. And so my job as a kid was to keep the fire burning around the pot. So it was a lot like stoking a wood kiln. And so all of that stuff was, in my head, and it was ingrained in me. And I didn't know anything about pottery, but I loved drawing. And my grandmother used to collect old magazines, and she would collect calendars. And I would draw on the back of calendars, draw pictures of my great-great-grandmother. And when I went to elementary school, we did our lessons on Big Chief tablets. You remember Big Chief tablets? So I would fill up a Big Chief tablet every day or every week. And my mother would scold me because she had to buy a new Big Chief tablet. And my grandmother was there one day when she was scolding me, and she said, "Don't scold him, he's going to be an artist one day." She said, "I'll buy his Big Chief tablets." So she would buy cases of Big Chief tablets, and I felt empowered. And so then my mother got on board, and she started collecting magazines that had the Draw Me advertisements in them. Art Instruction School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Did anybody take that course? Back there. So when I was 15, I came home from school one day. This is in Athens, Alabama, in the early 1960s. And a white man was in the living room with my parents. And I came home from school, and everybody was looking at me very strangely. And I thought I'd been caught doing something naughty, and that man was going to take me away. And so, because I'd been doing lots of naughty things, but he opened up a portfolio. I didn't know what a portfolio was, and showed the drawings that my mother had sent, and I was allowed to take a correspondence course, and I did that for 2 years. But my father had to pay $20 a month for me to take that course. So I thought that I was going to be an illustrator, so I went to community college. And in community college, I took 2D art. There was a ceramic course across the hall from one of my classes, and all the potters were mixing glazes, and they were building a kiln using reclaimed brick. They were working together, helping each other on the wheel, and it was a lot like what we did on the farm, because everybody was working together. But in the 2D classes, we had cubicles, and we didn't really communicate that much, so I was attracted to the cooperative activity in the studio. Everybody knows that about clay, right? We're all working together, we're all helping each other. I think during the COVID, that was one of the attractions for people wanting to work with clay, wanting to go to the studio. So I went into the clay studio, and they were working on the wheel, and I asked the guy if I could make a pot, and he said, "Go away, you're bothering me." So I said, "I bet you I can make a pot. I bet you $1, because that's easy to do." So he got upset. So I got on the wheel, and I made this short, dumpy little pot, and that was the beginning of it. And so that's it. So the cauldrons came from my interest in doing the firing, making the pots, and wanting to make my memory of keeping the fire burning. And when I started making pots, my memory was, okay, I want to make a big cauldron. But every time I would fire them, they would warp, because I wanted them on tripod feet or on 4. And I tried everything. I tried making them thick. I tried making them upside down. And one night I had a lucid dream. I dreamt that I saw these big pots, and I reached out and touched it, and I realized that they were hollow on the inside, and that they were made with 2 walls. So I started experimenting until I worked out how they were made. And so I start out with a bowl, and in this case, I made a donut. I split it in half, and then I go back and forth, adding coils of clay until I get to the size and shape that I want, and then I fold the outside wall over to meet the outside wall, the inside wall over to meet the outside wall. So I'm almost at that stage. So what I'm going to do now is add a coil to this rim, and then add a coil here and fold it over. So that's what I'm doing. So Paul, I turn it over to you.
So, all right, what I'm doing, I'll just jump right into this process. Since it seemed like many of you didn't get to see us yesterday morning, then some of this won't seem like too much of a repeat. But okay. I do have other things I'm going to be showing that, for those of you who came yesterday, will build off of what I was doing yesterday. A lot of yesterday was kind of how to make some of these things, like how to carve blocks and how to put an image into the screen. And I did do a monoprint. But what I wanted to do today is do a monoprint again, but I'm doing it first. So, because we were able to print it and pull it. And again, these are smaller plaster bats. So I just wanted to do this right away so I could just focus on this process for a second. Because it is one of my favorite processes. So, and then I try to, this is a little bit how I work in my studio also, is I just have all these different types of things around. And everything is kind of a relatively good pace in terms of how things dry, but I do like the ability to do one thing and then move right over to something else, do another thing, so I'm always busy, right? Because a lot of us, don't have a lot of time, right? So when we are in the studio or are able to do something, I try to maximize my time. Hi, Bing. Sorry. So I try to maximize my time as much as I can. and I'll say this now, if someone asks me a question or I start a story, chances are whatever I'm asked or wherever I start, I'm going to finish way off of what the beginning was. So sometimes steer me back. And I realized I was starting to talk about something yesterday and I veered off and I never got back to what my original point was. But so with monoprinting, I've always done a lot of screening and relief printing. I've always done printmaking and clay. But when my wife and I got married, we had a son right away. But what I wasn't used to is, like, all my friends got married early. So I had no idea what it was like to have a kid. And I didn't know how much time it took, when they were brand new. So back then, we lived in Upland, Pennsylvania, it was just south of Philly, and we had an old colonial, so I used the basement as my studio. So I would just work down there. I was like, oh, this won't be a problem. I'll be around. But I didn't realize that every 3 hours, a baby wakes up, needs to have something fed, changed, etc. So I had no idea. So now my time was divided in 2-hour sections, like 2 hours, something to do, 2 hours, something to do. And my work takes a while to get done. So I didn't want to start making work quicker because then I felt that I didn't have that same investment of time in there that I'd like to have. So that's when I started to do more monoprinting. So one of the great things about monoprinting is that you're not on the clay clock until I actually pour it. So it is something that I can start and then stop at any moment. So what I'll do now is go ahead and print this one. So this is a regular plaster bat, and it's made with Pottery plaster number 1 or 2. And then if you make your own plaster bat, then it needs to be cast on glass or plexiglass, so the face of this is smooth and flat. And then any kind of mold box you want to make, whether, wood, metal, and then, just put a little bit of Murphy's oil soap in there. And then make sure that you weigh your plaster. And then there's just a guide, in terms of how much water you need per plaster. If you don't weigh your water and your plaster, then it's still going to get hard, but it's only going to be good for a shorter period of time. It has a shorter lifespan. So my professor, Victor Spinsky, when I was an undergraduate, he's a master mold maker, and he would always say, it's better to take an extra 5 minutes to weigh your materials and the mold lasts for 10 years than save that 5 minutes and remake that mold next year. And it's the truth. I have molds that are, over 10 years old and they cast just like the, first day I made them. So make sure you weigh that. So once you cast it, these plaster bats only need to be about 1 inch thick. My larger ones, maybe 1.5 inches at the most. If you make larger bats out of plaster, you only need more thickness just for strength. That's it. Because the thicker this is, any mold makers in here? Plaster mold makers? Okay, so then preaching to the choir. So the thicker your mold walls are, it just takes longer to wick the water through, right? And then once you take the piece out, then it just takes longer for that water to evaporate out of your mold. So a thicker mold isn't a more effective mold. It's just heavier and thicker, and it slows things down a little bit. So normally molds you'll see have just about like 1 inch thick wall, and that's why if you have a cylindrical form, that's normally why it's more of an octagonal shape on the outside, because wherever the mold is thick and thin, then it wicks at different rates. So then your walls, thicken at different rates as well. So for flat casting, just about 1 inch, because that way it wicks really well. And then because we are casting, when I pour a casting slip on there, and then when I do that, the plaster wicks the water out of the clay, and then as the clay firms up, it pulls the underglaze out of the plaster bat. So it basically rehydrates what's on here, and then it becomes the face of that. So I'm going to print this. This is just whenever I do print screening, this is just an Amico, it's like the LUG1 black. It's just a really nice, rich black. And then I use these Michael Scher, these Mud Tools workhorse sponges to print with instead of a squeegee. So the reason I use these is that these are very smooth and they're very dense. So when I'm printing, there isn't any texture of the sponge that gets left behind in the print. So I let my underglaze sit out for maybe like a day or two so it gets nice and thick. So that way when I'm dipping it in, the sponge is absorbing it, and I only want the underglaze inside the sponge. So So I think you can see this. So when I'm holding it up, all the underglaze is absorbed into the sponge. I don't want it coated on the outside of the sponge. If it's coated on the outside, when I try to print, then it just push too much through and it'll just smear. So I have this loaded up, and then I'm just going to wax on, wax off in a nice little circle. Like if you don't want to do like sponge painting kind of thing, because that just explodes the underglaze through as well. So just kind of a sweeping motion and not that much pressure. And you kind of follow the lines. So I'm just going to print this one lightly. Now, this screen is a UV screen, has UV emulsion, the way that it was created. And I have it taped on the edge, so I'm using this as a hinge, so I can cheat a look. I can peel it back and see how well it printed, and if I missed a spot, I can go back and get it. So I'll go do that now. Whoops, yeah, I need to press a little harder there for sure.
Okay. Put that one away.
Nope, too hard. Well, I always say nothing's an emergency. So here's the first one, here's the second one. I pressed a little too hard there and it got around, but that's okay. Any of you do printmaking at all? Any screen printers? Oh, good group. How about relief printers? All right. Mono printers? All right. Well, all of you can do all three. It's all very related. This is, a mono printing technique. I can either paint directly onto here, or I can print on here with screens, or I can block print on here with a relief print. And then I can leave them black and white like I did yesterday, but what I wanted to do today was show you how I paint them in. I do have...
A big paddle.
Oh,
Thank you.
so that's a mono type that's on the screen right now. Those of you who weren't here yesterday, I didn't have any images. I have images today. So that's a monotype that you see up there. So on a plaster bat, I drew all that first, painted in the black lines first, and then I hand painted in the color. And so that's what I'm going to be doing now, because once it's on the plaster bat and you have your line drawing, then it's about filling it in with color. And now this is the thing that, when we had our son Miles, and every 3 hours, we were on duty, I had to, I can do this, and then I can go away for a day and then come back to this. So if I printed this on clay, then I have to cover it up and all of that. And, my wife was like, Paul, I had to be gone. I didn't have time to cover stuff up or spritz it. So this is what I started doing. It gave me a way where I could still put as many hours as possible into the piece, but I could do it at little increments of time. I could just stop and start whenever I wanted. And then when it's completely done, that's when you put a clay wall around the perimeter and pour the casting slip on. Now, once you cast it, then you're on the clay clock. So with the underglazes, whatever brand you use, is perfectly fine. But you want to think of your underglazes as acrylic paint. What you see is what you get, and about line quality. And so when I'm painting these in, and I'm just going to do a simple kind of paint job just of the middle, so I can continue on with the rest of this. What you print first, like if I do this as a line, then if I put my other line on top, when you pull it, that's how it's going to come up. So everything that you start overlapping, the thing in front of it, blocks it. So foreground to background. So you're kind of thinking backwards a little bit. So I have some little small brushes, and I tend to do like skin tones first. Now you see, these are dry already, right? I mean, I just printed it, but they're already dry. And again, that's the beauty of you can get right back onto here. As soon as I printed it, it started to wick that water right out. Now also, I can take the underglaze and just paint this whole face in. I don't have to paint around the details of the face, because that's going to be in front of this color. So that's nice to take advantage of, because if I want... So instead of having to brush around a color where you might get some strokes going in the direction that the brush is going, I can go whatever direction I want, and then it's a nice, more even coat in certain areas. So I have more control of what I'm doing. I like to work on banding wheels no matter what what I have, so that I don't have to keep picking it up. So let's see. So again, this is not something that is a quick process either. That's why I got these small ones. But these plaster bats, you can make them as large as what your kiln, will allow. I fire all of these flat. You kind of treat them like a tile. And I found that when you pull them, I'll take drywall and I'll put a piece of drywall on here, then I'll flip it to take it off, and then I'll put another piece of drywall back on the back and put it right side up, so it's sitting on drywall. Then I just let it air dry for about a half hour, and then I put a piece of wax paper on top because the wax paper won't stick to it. Then I put a piece of drywall back on it, and then just let it dry between drywall, because if it's fine getting air from the end, because now when it shrinks, it's going to shrink in. So I normally leave them sitting between drywall for about a week. That way, I'm not fast. I rather spend extra time drying than extra time making it again. And they're mono prints, so it's just a singular print. I can't, quite recreate it the same. So that's the way I dry all of them. So, between 2 pieces of drywall for a week. And that way, because clay has a memory. So if you dry something, if it's flat and then the corners start to curl up a little bit and you push them down, it's probably going to curl up in the kiln. It's going to remember that. No matter what, it's just going to happen. And the bigger it is, the more, unsettling it looks. But so just do that. As long as it's shrinking in that direction, then that's the memory it has instead of coming up. And then you can't do this at school. I'm fortunate enough, I have a kiln in my studio, so I don't put any kiln wash on my shelves. On my kiln, because every time you put kiln wash on, you're putting a layer of stuff on there. And the more layers you have on a chip, they're super uneven, and that causes problems for flat work. So I don't kiln wash my shelves at all. For my greenware, I just have one big shelf, for my electric kiln, and I just put it flat on the surface. So since I don't have kiln wash on there, my shelf is nice and flat. And it gets a little stain from the clay, but that's it. You need kiln wash to protect it from glaze, right? So, at this point in my career, I should be able to do things and not have glaze drip on my shelves working by myself. So if I do, then that's, then I guess I deserve to buy another shelf. But so that's the way I fire them. I just let them dry super slow, and then I put them on the shelf, and then I keep short shelves in there, and then I put maybe like 1 inch tall, like furniture, and then I just stack them up, like that. And then I fire. For these, I fire once. Typically, I just once fire them. I'll take them up to about 1940. Sometimes I go to 1967 because that's my birthday. So, because how many of you use cones anymore? So it's just, with electric kilns, since you just punch in numbers, it's kind of made cones not, I'm always looking it up like 06 is 18. I'm like, I've just been firing so long, I kind of like being able to go a little hotter, a little cooler, and so, I fire mine at 1967. Some of you who are born in the 2000s, and you don't want to use your birthday, but other than that, typically around 1900 is where I fire a lot of my work, and then sometimes I go a little bit lower around 04, 06 for certain colors, but when I just once fire, 1967 does it. That way, I use a mid-range body, because my first firing, I'm firing for strength, right? I'm not doing anything else to it. So if I do a soft bisque, then the piece is weak. I'm not putting any glaze on there or anything like that. So I'm firing it so that the clay itself has matured and it's vitrified, and I know that that's fine. So that's why I use a medium range or like a cone 3 body. So I'm getting up closer to its vitrification point, because I know I'm just going to once fire these pieces. How many of you have ever seen like really shiny prints? Yeah, you don't, right? So if I'm printing on paper, I don't want super shiny clay prints, right? Just because it's clay, I don't have to put a coat of clear on it when I fire it. It makes it ridiculously hard to photograph, number one. But sometimes we just have to get out of our habits. So since I don't put any clear on it, I just go up to that. And if I do want to put something on the colors to maybe give it a little bit of richness, I'll just put a matte gel medium on top of it. So are all you guys familiar with matte gel medium, acrylic gel medium? It's an acrylic paint modifier. So that's just called acrylic gel medium. You can get it in matte, glossy, semi-gloss, satin. So it's when you do an acrylic painting, then you paint that on top to give you the surface that you want. It's archival. So I normally get matte, sometimes satin, and then I'll put that on. So that way it seals it, and that way if you touch it, it doesn't give like fingerprints. And it does a similar thing as clear in terms of it does make the colors, gives them a touch of richness. But then the surface isn't reflective. What else? Trying to give those are the questions I get a lot more so about how do I finish my things. And sometimes I just don't do anything to them if I want them just to be matte. Typically they do end up as prints, and then I frame them, I frame them all myself. And but I like working with wood, so I have those type of machines. They're just simple ones like chop saw and things, but because I don't make very specific sizes, so I like being able to make my own. I like to make everything, right? If something's framed, I want to make it. If something's supposed to be made out of another material, I want to do that. And I don't know if so. There should be a figure coming up after this one. So I look at figures, and so the one after this I think is mine. Those aren't mine. Just let me know when you see a sculpture up there. I keep painting. All right, so with that one, it's called Maker, right? Because I like making. So with that, this is the first time I used leather. So I made the body out of clay. And then after I made the body out of clay, I carved the head out of soapstone. Stone has a very classical look to it. I can't make clay look like that, and I don't want to try to make clay look like that. So I taught myself how to carve stone years ago. So I carved the stone, and then the apron is made out of leather, and then the feet and the shoes are made out of wood. And then I made a little wooden base and carved a little stone carving, and then the tools are dowel rods and brass. So I wanted to make all the different parts. So to do that, over the years, I keep teaching myself new things. But I bought some leather and cut it so I could sew the leather apron to put on it. And then once I got into that, has anyone done any leather working? One? Okay, so my only warning against leather working is that it's just like clay, where it's a dangerous addiction. I am like, I love clay, and I'm always going to do clay, but now I have visions of being like a retired leather worker, where I'm just sitting and stitching. I love saddle stitching. If anyone's, one of these days, I give mold making workshops too, because I do a lot of mold making with different materials, like silicone rubber and pewter, et cetera. And I'm giving a workshop at Aramont that's just intro to different types of mold making. And because I give these kind of workshops too, but I also like to show people other things that I like to do, because we're all artists, right? We do clay, but we do a lot of other things as well. But my new goal in life is one day I want to give a leather working workshop. So I have a leather wallet, I have a leather belt. My wife has like 15 leather bags because I keep making, now I make all kind of presents for her and stuff like that. But with these skills, it's actually made me approach clay a little bit. A lot of our terms are like leather hard, et cetera. So those of us who work in clay and you work with soft slabs, that's kind of how you work with leather as well, in terms of cutting it, same kind of patterns, but instead of scoring and slipping, you're stitching things together. So as you see, I'm just painting this in. And then once I've finished painting this, as I mentioned, I'm going to put a clay dam around the perimeter, and then I'll pour a casting slip on it. So I think this is probably as far as I'll go on here. But I wanted you to see just a little bit of how I paint these in. Like everything else is more of the same. Now, the one thing I will do sometimes, I'll just do the belt. So when I cast this, like I said, everything gets absorbed up into the face of the clay. So when you pull it off, the slab is perfectly smooth, because that's the new face. Now, if I want to have a little slight relief on there, then I can go ahead and do what I just said. pull it, and then when it gets to leather hard, then I can go and hand paint in the rest if I want my underglaze to kind of sit on the surface versus being part of the surface. It's subtle, but you notice it. And I think what makes work interesting are the subtleties, right? If you're up close to the piece, there's something that you should get from it. If you take a few feet back, hopefully there may be something else now that you can see with a little bit of distance. And when you notice that difference, that makes you want to go up close to it again to see if you missed something that first time. So how can you make a person interact with your piece? And that's about thinking, how can somebody see different things maybe from different distances? And how can I get somebody maybe to come back? I mean, we're all guilty of going to museums, and you know how you're just walking and you're looking and you're looking and you're looking, and then you stop and then you look at something. Like, I want to be the piece that you stop, right, and take a look at. And that's so hard to do. And not every piece does that, but you have to think about that. You have to have that in mind when you're making your piece. And James, when James is ready to pop back in, he'll just tell me to stop. But otherwise, you want me to just keep rambling, James?
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Well, let me tell you a little bit. This is my studio. I retired in 2018 after teaching at Texas Tech for 35 years. So I've put all my energy into my studio and my gallery. This is my gallery and my studio. My gallery is really important because I have a clean space. I can go out and contemplate my work, look at it. I get ideas from looking at my work. I go out with a sketchbook and I'll sketch a piece and think what would happen if I alter this or if I move it around a little bit. I was telling you about the double wall forms. After I started making the double wall forms, it quickly became a point of departure for creating a story that could be played with from the rim. And they started having names like intimidation posture or fragility or communion, preening posture, all because of the rim. My studio I designed it so that there's an airflow and there's a linear element, studio space, gallery, so it really works. So now I'm going to roll out a coil of clay and put it on the rim. And I've learned through trial and error that if I put a coil of clay on the inside and fold it over to meet the outside, there's less chance of it cracking because the clay has memory and it doesn't want to be a double wall pot. It wants to pull away, but it will cooperate more if it's folded over to the outside rim. And I work very slowly and I dry them very slowly. And when I dry them, I lift them up and I move them when they're leather hard and I dry them in the kiln. I don't lift them when they're dry because they're more fragile, especially when I'm making them thin. So that's where I'm at now. And this is when I'm making a really big one. With this piece, I made it as a donut. But when I'm making a very large piece, I'll make a bowl of clay and then I'll roll out a coil and put that in the center and pull it up. That's how I'm making that one. So the pieces that are at the Weston Gallery, they were made this way. And I work back and forth. I work on 3 wheels so that I always have something to do. While one piece is drying, I'll work on the next piece and then work on the next piece. So throughout a month, I can make, 3 pieces. But I don't ever use a heat gun or a torch. I let them dry naturally so that I can really control the water and the amount of moisture that stays or evaporates. Because I put a lot of work into it and I don't want to have to fart around with cracks or fixing. I don't like doing that. So the appendages are rolled out in a coil. I could use an extruder, but I don't like that. I like the happy accident. I like when I'm rolling out something and finding the possibility of something new from rolling out something and seeing, oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that. And then I cut them in half and hollow it out, put it back together, and then put it on. And I'm fuming these with stannous chloride, which is a very dangerous chemical. It gives off chlorine gas. So I'm using a glaze that has lead in it, so it's not for to be used. It's definitely a sculpture glaze. Amoco used to make a glaze that really worked well. It was called gold luster, but they stopped making it because it had lead in it. They got sued, so they stopped making it. So I went out and bought every bottle I could find, and and then Biz Littell, a potter in Colorado, he's in the book, the book that Paul and I wrote. He came up with 3 glazes that don't have lead in it, and you can fume them, but they don't give you the results that the lead glaze does. But you can still get the same, somewhat results. Anybody ever tried those glazes in the book? Okay, so the way you do the fuming, you fire it to cone 04. And then I like to use gold luster and platinum luster because you get more color. But you can fume without using gold or luster. And you can also fume clear glazes. You can fume cone 10 glazes. You just have to experiment if you want to do it. I don't do it at workshops anymore because it's so dangerous. So you take the glaze up to whatever temperature you're going to fire to. And then you let it cool down between 850 to 900. And then you open the kiln up and you introduce 2 tablespoons of stannous chloride on a hot brick on one side of the pot and on the other side of the pot. And then you close the kiln and you run like hell. And you let the fumes fume for about 2 minutes. And then you open it up and let the smoke escape. And you'll get unbelievable colors, rainbow colors. And if you spray gold on top of it before you fume it, you get amazing colors like the one that I have at the Westin Hotel. But it's dangerous, and you need to do it in well-ventilated area and wear protective clothing, a mask, because it can cause chemical pneumonia. So don't do it if you are scary or you want to be real safe. But I've been doing it a long time, and I'm doing okay. And I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, I'm going to pour these real quick. I have commercial casting slip here. I think it's I didn't see it before it was put in here, but I think it's probably a porcelain slip. So with casting slip, this process isn't dependent on a particular one. So if you're a slip caster, you already have it available, you can use that. What I do is my hand building body, like my regular clay body that I have in the studio, I just use that. As I'm working, I take all my scrap and I throw it into a 5-gallon bucket till it gets about, halfway, 3/4 of the way full, and then I just put them aside. And then when it's time for me to make casting slip, then I just put water in it until the water gets up to about the level of what the highest pieces are. Let it slake for a day or two, and then plunge it, and then take specific gravity, get it right, and then deflocculate it. So I just cast what I do. Because I also have some other molds that I have where I want to be able to cast parts and maybe add those parts to my work. So you need to use the same clay body so you have the same shrinkage rate. And when you have your own studio, you just don't have room for a variety of clay bodies. So it's another way of just being efficient. I tend to use an earthenware body. I like brown clay bodies. I'm brown, so I like my clay to be brown. Because it's a way for me, I do like it, and I do like the contrast I get from it, but it is also, a conscious decision as well. And because my work isn't necessarily, my work isn't outwardly, let's say, about certain, maybe social, political type of things, or maybe just some concerns I might have about race relations and things, but it's all in there. But my approach is a little bit more of a subtle type of approach where I don't lead with that, but when you're looking at the work, I hope you see the seeds of that there. But that is one of the reasons I do like to use brown clays. All right, so what I'm going to do is cast this, and it's kind of like making pancakes. And I use that reference all the time, and I never make pancakes, but I watch my wife make pancakes. And I try to cook, but then she just always tells me to stop, go away. So I buy the groceries, she does the cooking, then I do the dishes. So that's like our arrangement. That way, she doesn't like to shop, and she doesn't like to do the dishes.
You don't
I can't
do any
cook.
cooking?
So what's that?
You don't cook any?
I try, I offer. They won't, my son either. He doesn't like what I cook either. I've tried, I think I cook just fine, but they say I'm a little heavy-handed with cheese. Because it's just can't use enough cheese. All right, so again, you got to bring me back to what I was originally. So you want to start in one spot and then just let it move across. So as I'm starting to pour here, there's going to be a wall of slip that's going to move forward. I want to stay right behind that wall to push it forward. That way I don't capture any air there. Now if I start in one spot and start to get ahead of it and come back, if it curls in on itself or those walls touch each other, then you could have a little bit of a seam. So that's why I just pick one spot and let it go. I'm only going to pour this about halfway up. I cut the walls at 1 inch, so that way I know if I fill these up halfway, that's a 1/2 inch, and that way it's going to shrink back and just be like maybe 1/4 of an inch. So same thing here. This is liquid enough to where it's moving pretty well. If this was on the thicker side in terms of its viscosity, then, if it had a little bit more drag, then I would just use a kind of like a rubber rib, and you kind of jiggle it across. You don't want to scrape across. Has anyone ever poured smooth concrete out? It's just like that. How you kind of jiggle it over. You just don't bring it over. So now, because water finds its own level, so as long as you have the right consistency, when you pour, it'll level it off. So that being said, you want to level your bat first, right? So, which I didn't do here, but we're going demo style. So typically I'd put a bubble level on there just to make sure this was perfectly level. Because if you don't, then you could have a thick and thin side of your print when you do that. So this is considered this is like a fresh pour in the sense that this is the first time I've poured it today. So right now it's wicking through. If I wanted this to dry a little faster, I do have strips of drywall that I cut very thinly, and then I would take this, like I would have set it up already on top of 2 strips of drywall, so that way it can get air from the bottom so it can wick faster. If I leave this here in an hour, like if I pick this up, it might be getting damp on the bottom, because it's actively pulling the moisture through. So if you are casting flat, just put some strips underneath, so that way it's just wicking the water out and can evaporate from the back as well, so it kind of speeds the process up a touch. So something small like this should, I'll be able to pull this towards the end of our session, hopefully just take about an hour and a half, maybe an hour for it to set up. And then I'm going to cut the walls off, and then to see how stiff the sides are, and then I just simply flip it. And that's all with that. So like I mentioned, you're not on a clay clock until you do this. Now everything that has to do with clay slabs you continue to adhere to. Now, you don't have to think of this as a print. You could just think of this as the first step of how you're going to maybe hand build with it. If I wanted to use this as a soft slab, then I would just pull it a little bit earlier while it's soft. If I wanted it to be a stiff slab, then I would just wait until it's, again, a little firmer and then flip it. So it's just a slab after that. I just had a way to pre-decorate it with a screen or with a block instead. The other nice thing about working this way is that, say I pull it and I'm not real happy with how it came out, I have a bunch of plastic plates and things. So if I don't like it, I can just slump it into a plate and then trim it up and just make it into a plate, because everything looks great as a plate. So, and that rhymes. So I don't make those on purpose, but I do end up with a handful by the end of the year. But they have this kind of interesting look to them, and then they just become test tiles for me, because I try to use everything. So if I put it in a plate, I don't have to worry about being flat. So I can throw them in the kiln anytime and practice different glazes or overlaying things on top of those type of underglazes. So I can just keep testing. So it's good to kind of, like, there's no mistakes, right? There's just learning opportunities. So I try to continue with that. So I guess I didn't did I talk about what these are? Okay. So these are called speed screens. There's also another kind called photo-ease, but these are UV-sensitive screens, and they come pre-packaged. They already have the emulsion on them. They come in different sizes, 9 by 12, 10 by 14, depending on who's selling them. These are speedball ones. That's why a lot of speedball stuff starts with speed something. So these are speed screens. So this is a UV-sensitive emulsion. They come in a black envelope. And the way it works is that whether it's this or the other kind, is you'll have a black substrate first. It's like a black piece of foam core. And then you'll take your screen out of the black envelope, and it has a protective coating on it, a film. So you'll peel that off and put that down so the emulsion side is up. And then just take a photocopy, just plain old regular photocopy, whatever you made, and take that so it's photocopy side down. Then once you do that, you take a piece of glass or a plexi that doesn't have any UV blockers and put that on top. And that's how you sandwich that. So once it's sandwiched, they also make a UV LED light. You have that about 14 inches above, turn it on, expose it for 2 minutes, and it's done. So wherever the black lines are, that's blocking the light. And wherever the paper is white, the UV passes through the paper. So that's why you don't need to make a negative or get a transparency or anything. So once that's done, then you put it in water, and then you rinse out the unhardened emulsion, and then you have a screen. So I refer to these as loose screens. The nice thing about a loose screen is that I don't have to have a particular orientation like this one. Like this one, I can only print this way. When I put this face down, I can't reverse this and print the other direction. But this one, I can print either side of the screen. Like one side doesn't screen better than the other. You can screen both. So I do like that as well. The other thing that I'll do with a screen like this is I can print on things that are vertical. So I made a quick, just a slab cylinder that I am going to print on, and I also have I wanted to talk a little bit about bisque sprigs that I have made as well. So on a cylinder I made, I'll do some sprigging, and I'll do some printing on it as well. So those of you who have, like vessels, like what James is doing, if he wanted to print on the side of his pots, then he could use one of these screens and put on there.
Cool.
So what I'll do here, so I'm going to do the same process of screening, and I'm rifling through gloves here as I take them off and put them on. So again, this is just a black glaze, and I'm just using a sponge again. So what I want to do with this screen that I made yesterday is I want to do some spot color, to do a multicolor image. So this was made with drawing fluid and screen filler yesterday. So drawing fluid and screen filler is like wax resist and glaze. So, wherever you put wax resist, glaze doesn't stick to it. This is how this works as well. So it's a blue fluid called drawing fluid, and wherever you paint that onto the screen, that's your image. You let that dry for about 20, 30 minutes, and then I use the scoop coater, but then you take the screen filler, and then you pull that over top of it, and then it resists the screen filler, but where the screen is empty, that's where it hardens. And then once it hardens, which takes about 45 minutes, with water, you just rinse that out. Now, this is something that you can do at school. So any K-12 teachers? There you go. Yeah, K-12 is, it's hard teaching in K-12. I mean, I teach college actually on purpose because K-12 is so much harder. But with that, you have to have this magical thing on your things that's called an AP. So anything that has AP certified on there, you can use it as an art material, K-12. So lots of times there's limitations about what we can do with our students, K-12 level because of certain materials that we can't have. So this is all AP approved. So this is something that's great to use with students of any age because they can, just draw something on a piece of paper, take the screen, put it over their drawing, and then with a pencil, just trace their drawing with a pencil so that drawing's then in the screen. Then you just turn it over, and then you just, with the brush and the drawing fluid, just, draw over top of the pencil drawing you just made, and then do your screen filler, and then you just rinse it out in the sink in the classroom, because again, it's all non-toxic, it's fine, and then the students are away printing stuff. So it gives them a printing, experience that's very, it's quick, because, what are classes, teachers, like 30, you got about 30 actual minutes? No? 25? Ooh, that's a long class. Yeah, but if you are more like that 45 minute, I mean, that's fast, right? So you could say one day they'll make drawings, the next day they'll take the drawing and put it into the screen, and then as the teacher, you'll show them how the screen filler works, and then you'll do the rest of them afterwards. And then so over maybe 2 or 3 classes, they can slowly make the screen, and you can introduce all the information that goes along with it, and then now I'm going to be printing underglaze, but you can print fabric ink, onto t-shirts. You can do regular screen printing ink onto paper. This is just a screen. Everything I'm showing here with the Speedball products, this is just printmaking products. I'm just replacing ink with ceramic materials. So yeah, you can, again, just fabric ink or regular acrylic ink and print on paper or print on textiles. So if I want to make this multiple colors, that means I need to, like spot color means I want to have color in the spot that I want it. So I'm going to take this image with black and print it on this vinyl adhesive paper. So this is shelf liner. So this is the vinyl side. So I need to print on this side because this is the sticker side. Because when I print this, I'm going to stick this on the back of a screen. So that way I have to cut out the image properly. So when I print that spot color, this is going to line back up over that. So, and I have two empty screens here to do that. So I'm going to print, and then once I print these, so if I want this to be 3 colors, I need to print 3 of these. These are just vinyl stencils afterwards. And the whole roll of it is like $5 at the hardware store. Should I go on, James?
Sure. Let me tell a story. Okay. Yesterday I told a story about when I resident artist in Hong Kong, and but this is kind of a long story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So I was a resident artist in Hong Kong, and my daughter and I, we went over during the Christmas holiday. This was in the early 2000s, and she was on vacation from college. So she was going to be with me for about a month, and I was going to be there for the whole semester. We got there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to give a lecture at 2 o'clock that afternoon, so I had jet lag, and I was really tired and forgetting a lot of my stories when I gave the lecture. And she was trying to help me remember, and I was having trouble. And she said, "Dad, tell the story about being lost in the desert and how that affected a series of your work." So I told the story, and I got back on track telling stories. And my lecture was being translated into Mandarin to one of the attendants. He was dressed in a nice business suit, and afterward he came over and through his translator, he said, "I understand your work." He said, "You collect memories." And I had never thought about the fact that I collect memories, but that's true. He said, "I want to give you a memory." He said he had a daughter whose name was Bahan, and she was a university student at Jintazen Ceramic Institute of Jintazen, and that he would create an itinerary for me to travel with her for 15 days to important places throughout China that would affect my work. And I didn't believe him, but I said, "Okay, thank you." And so I continued to work in Hong Kong, and then I got a notice for me to travel and meet his daughter, and I went over and we traveled around together. And it was interesting because we would go to places that had never seen a black potter, and she would introduce me as a potter, and they would say, "No, no, 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 no." And I would have to make something. And so they would have these old potter's wheels that had a hole in the fly wheel, and you'd have to catch it with a stick, and you go round and round and round and round, and then I would make a pot. And it got to be a joke. Bahan would introduce me as a potter, and she'd say, "James, it's time for you to show your action now." So I would show my action. And then Bahan wanted me to teach her slang. So I didn't know much, so I taught her "yep" and "shut the front door." So we had a lot of fun. She understood what that meant, and we would be talking, and she would say, "Shut the front door, James." So she had exams one week, and so it was just me and her father, and he didn't speak English. So we went to this village. It was called Seaman Village, and they had a 500-year-old kiln site, and we fired the wood kiln. And I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it. It was a huge kiln. There's a picture of it in my slide lecture. We loaded the kiln in one day and fired the kiln the next day in 24 hours. And I would not have believed it. They had a kiln master who did nothing but stack the door and instructed the stokers, and he would go, "Hoop," and they would stoke, and he would say, "Huh," and they would stop. And he would get on top of the kiln and look inside a hole on the top of the kiln to determine how hot it was. And he also could determine how hot it was by putting a plate, clay plates, in the door, and determine by looking at the color that they would get. And that was it. And it was porcelain, and he fired them all in saggar, in clay saggars. So to get there, we took where's my needle tool? Did I lose it? We took you see it? Okay. We took a taxi to get there, and it took 4 hours by taxi to get there. And to come back, we took a Chinese truck, three-wheel truck, and we took a bus. And on the bus, we got on with, have anyone been to China before? Like, yeah, rural China, yeah. So you get on the bus, and there are people with live chickens and slabs of beef and pork, and they would have pork, pigs wrapped in baskets alive. They would be live, and they would wrap a basket around it, weave a basket around it, and carry it. And it was really interesting, and everybody wanted to sit next to me. So I was a celebrity. So we got to a train station, and there was a female policeman dressed in blue, and she had white gloves on. And she was really agitated about something. I don't know what it was. I didn't understand it, but she was really upset. And my host, Baiwan, didn't speak English, so he couldn't tell me what was going on. But I wasn't afraid. I hadn't done anything wrong. So I was just, nonchalant, la-da-da-da-da-da. And then 2 policemen came, and they took my luggage, and they took me by the arm, and they took me into a room. And I still wasn't afraid. Baiwan was still with me. And they were discussing stuff, and at that time, I wasn't shaving my head, and they had a mirror. Think of Law and Order. There was a mirror. And I went up, and I was picking my afro. You can imagine Chinese policemen on the other side laughing. And so they went through my luggage, and they found a book that was written on my work, A Meditation of Fire, and you may have seen the photograph of me with President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton at the White House Craft Collection. And when they saw that photo, they got really excited, and they started making notes, and they went and made some phone calls, and I said, oh, shit. This is going to be serious. And so they made some phone calls, and then they found an album that my daughter had put together for my birthday, and it had pictures of the family and pictures of Junction, Texas, where I taught every summer, and pictures of my kids riding horses in Junction on a ranch. One of my friends owned the ranch, and they would ride horses every summer. And before that, one of the Chinese men would sit in front of me, and he would go, And I would say, I'm sorry, all I can say is ni hao, say shay. That's it. And he goes, and so it turned out that there had been an incident where, you all may have remembered this, there was an airplane that crashed with a Chinese airplane, a spy airplane, something. And so there was a lot of international upsetness going on. But they saw pictures of my kids, and one of the guys who was trying to get me to say something, he looked up and he saw a picture in my album of my daughter who had her hair done with braids and puff balls, and it made her look like Mickey Mouse. And she wrote underneath, "See, Dad, this is what happens when you let Mom do my hair." And he laughed. And I thought, he understood the joke, he gets it. And then he saw the pictures of them riding horses, and then he said in English, "Are there still real cowboys in Texas?" And I knew that I was safe, you know? So then we started talking about pottery, because he knew that I was a potter from the book. So anyway, pots saved my life while I was in China. So that's the end of that story. So now I'm closing this pot. So here, this is when you go, ooh, ah.
That's how you get them to do it.
James, does it matter how much space you leave in between the walls?
No. But I like this. This is what I like because it gives me a feeling of volume and depth, and enough depth and meat that I can sculpt. Okay.
James, do you find it's better to bring the inside out or the outside in when you're closing for the double wall of their pot?
Through trial and error, I've discovered that it's best to close it from the inside out.
Is that do with tension or cracking, or
Yeah,
what have you
it prevents cracking.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And there are holes in the feet, so I don't have to punch a hole in it anywhere else. Okay, that's it.
So James, between those layers, you don't score?
No, because it's wet, and so all I have to do is push down, and they stick together.
And you don't have them?
No, they don't. I don't ever put any scoring or anything.
Okay.
They're still wet, and I just squish them together. They just kiss.
Hello, quick question. I've done the fully enclosed much smaller. Do you have a rule of thumb? Because what I'll do is one side won't be tall enough. I'll run out of clay because I never seem to be able to. So do you have like a 1/3, 2/3, or is there some rule in terms of how you decide how much clay to leave to pull up the inside versus the outside? Because the inside has to be taller, and I never have enough, and then I'm
Yeah.
screwed.
You know, I've been doing it so long, I just kind of know,
Of course.
just visually know.
So there's no rule that you like. No,
There's no rule that I use. It's just intuition,
Okay.
just a feel, just feeling it.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to talk about this step that I'm doing now. So with the screen, you can have one screen and then you can do multiple colors just with that single screen by using this process. And this is another relatively inexpensive process because it's just the cost of the adhesive vinyl shelf liner. So the important thing is that you print on the side where the adhesive is, because that's what's sticking to the face of the screen. So if you get it backwards, then you have to unfortunately reprint it to do so. But I just used the black underglaze to do this. So there isn't anything special in terms of the printing process goes. You saw that I printed it with the sponge again, just like I did the smaller ones. And I typically always print with a sponge unless I have to use a squeegee. Sometimes with a bigger screen, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to use a sponge to cover that much area. So sometimes a squeegee, works best. So with spot color, again, it's one of those things that it is just what it sounds like. So here's my screen. So everywhere I want a different color, basically I'm cutting out an adhesive stencil then to print that color in the spot that I want it. So I just made the shirt and I just made it one long piece. I was going to break those up, but I want to make sure I'm getting plenty of done today. So with the shirt and the apron, I'm making that the same color. So when I printed that onto here, then with a snap knife or an X-Acto knife, then I just cut that out. I'm just cutting inside the lines. So this is my one stencil for the shirt and the screen, and then I cut out then where I want the color to go for the head and the arms. So I can do this for everything in here. So any place I want a separate color, I can just take one of the prints that I did and then cut out where I want that color. Now with this, what I'm going to do then is print these. This is called site registration, where each one of these images you line up by site. So you can do it one of two ways. You can print your colors first, but it would be tricky with this one. Like if I printed the arms and everything first, then the second color, I would be like lining up this with that. So just to make sure everything gets right, I normally just go ahead and print black first. And once my black is printed, then I'll go ahead and put my colors where I want them, and then I just line up my screen again and just print black over the whole thing. So I'm just layering that. I like doing the black twice anyway. Number one, it does give me an opportunity to line my images up properly, but it makes that black a little bit richer as well, because now I'm building up, in printmaking that's called building up a density of color. When you put, a lot of times in printmaking, it's just not one layer to get that, just like we do with underglazes. Sometimes we need 2-3 coats to kind of get the opacity that we want. So it's the same thing with printmaking. Lots of times you need to build that density up with one or two goes. So I'll go ahead and put the stickers on here. That's just basically what they are. I tend to keep, if I have a new screen, I tend to keep them wrapped until I actually use them, just to keep anything from getting, I know it's going to be dusty around here, and so I didn't want to get anything in the screen itself.
So I've made a decision. What time is it?
What's that?
I've made a decision on this one. Instead of trying to make an appendage on it, I'm going to do slip work on it and call it finished. And then I'm going to work on this piece here. So just a change in direction. Okay, that's all.
James,
Uh-huh.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
You've been making...
Hi.
Hi, James. You've been working with this form for many, many years.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just wondering, how has your relationship to this form changed over time?
Okay. It keeps growing. If you see the pieces at the Weston, I think you can see an evolution in the surfaces and in the rhythm of the forms. The glazing techniques, but the memory of that connection with the farming. Did you hear the story of where that came from? Were you here earlier?
No, I
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
there.
That's a strong ancestral connection with helping my mother and grandmother make those hominy and souse and cracklings and wash clothes in the cast iron cauldrons. And my job was, as a young kid, was to keep the fire burning hot around the pots. And I equate that to the same feeling that I get from firing a wood kiln. It's the exact same feeling. And so that feeling and connecting that with clay, when I started working with clay, was a connection. And it's a connection to my past with my family. And so I'm going to use that forever. And the names of the pieces now, or they keep evolving. I'm doing a series called Communion, and that relates to the rhythm of the, the rhythm of the appendages. There's a communion piece in the exhibition at the Weston Gallery. Have you seen that show yet?
Yeah, I saw it this morning.
So
yeah.
that one, and then there's a series called Guardians, and there's a Guardian at the Weston, and then there's a series called Fragility, and a series called Preening Posture, and a series called Ritual Display, a series called Intimidation Posture. So there are different series that I could probably do forever. I love working with them. So they keep evolving, and I keep getting new names. And now I'm working also with the figurative pieces, which I call the anthropomorphic forms, and they are in homage to my grandmother and my mother with the voluminous, voluptuous forms, and I'm dressing them up with gold and the friezes around the shoulders. So that's where I'm at.
That's one thing that I had noticed about looking at your work over the years, is that as much as they represent vessel forms and the metaphors that tie into your family, they also are evocative of the figure. They always feel like a human figure. They always feel like you.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question for Paul. So as somebody who's been using, hello. As somebody who's been using commercial underglaze decals fairly regularly for the last year and is interested into transferring into my own images, what would be, I know it might be a longer than a nugget of advice, but what would be your advice to start this process, other than getting the, speedball speed
So what type of materials would you need to get started? Or?
What would be your advice? The materials I've got, I actually have a great position and have been working with various slips and underglazes for quite some time and have a large background. But like on an artistic level, what is my first step? Should I get a screen and just go?
Pretty much, you know. I mean, it's sort of like, that kind of advice is almost for anything that's a creative endeavor, is just sort of jump right in, you know, because it's all very much, you know, everything's like sort of an exploration of something. So the thing about printmaking is that you have to do several of them to start to get used to the process. So you don't really need an idea right away. It's more so, it's process oriented, so it really is more about figuring out the process to begin with. So if I'm doing something new, I just start with something that's just very familiar to me in terms of like an image or something, because that's the one variable I can control. And then the other ones that I can't, if something changes or there's something that's evolving that I'm not sure what it is, I know it's a result of this new process that I'm doing. So with screening, I would start out simple in terms of like line and contour drawings. If you're going to do this process, you know, just take a drawing that you like or something, and then you're just trying to recreate that drawing with this process. Once you feel comfortable with that, then, like with this process, then maybe start to make a multi-color one. Once you feel good about that, then maybe get the speed screens, because now you've kind of figured out how to screen. Because that's sort of the nice thing about this, is that the more that you're screening, you're getting used to that. Then if you use the speed screens, where you can use a black and white photograph if you want, where it has finer lines and things, now you have a better understanding of how to print. So now you're just kind of focusing on how do you do a more detailed screen, and the new process of maybe burning a screen with this. So I always like to start simple first, and then build on each experience as much as possible. Same thing with the lino cuts, where what you want to start with, if you've never carved before, it's best to start with the speedy cut. It's super soft, carves real easy, so you get used to your tools and get used to your gouges. And then lino, that's a little firmer. Now once you're used to your gouges from cutting on here, then you're just concentrating on how do I get that same kind of quality of cut in here. So printmaking is pretty. It's nice that there are some materials that have a pretty nice entry point to it, and then as you get used to it, you can then kind of take it up a level in terms of some of the durability of it, or maybe a tighter fit as far as your mesh goes. But there's really nice entry points, for these processes. So for me, screening and relief are I think the two simplast
Okay,
to
awesome.
get going
Thank
in.
you.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, do you have to pre-do anything to your underglazes before you switch them out?
Well, I'm getting ready to print right now, so that's a good segue. So what I want to do is test print what I just did. So I'm going to screen print and make a paper transfer at the same time, because this is just how you make a paper transfer. So with the underglazes, again, doesn't matter what brand that you use. Most underglazes are fairly brushable, out of the container. But I take them, and like I mentioned earlier, I like cheese, right? So whenever my wife is away, a staple then is the Stouffer's mac and cheese. So if you get Stouffer's mac and cheese, the family size, and save all those containers, that holds a pint of underglaze. So I do it for art's sake. But so I pour them out, because anything that's tray-like, then you have a broader surface, so it evaporates a little bit faster. So I just pour them out into like a flat tray so that the water can evaporate out, and then I want it to get nice and thick. And then typically, since I'm sponging to put this on, it just needs to be thick enough so that it works for that process. If I'm going to use a squeegee, I let it get to like the consistency of icing. And then I'll use, this is a clear screen printing ink. It's acrylic transparent base. So I let it get the consistency of icing. Then when I add this to the underglaze, I'm bringing this to the consistency now of my modifier. So whenever you're modifying something, whatever is thinner impacts whatever is thicker. So that's why I need this to be thicker than this.
That's not meant for ceramic.
almost nothing I do is meant for ceramic, but it still works. So this burns right out.
Special that you have to put in it in order to make it go through the screen.
Nope. This is just straight out of the bottle, and if I do want it to have the body of screen printing ink, then I just put in actual screen printing ink. And it just burns right out. It has no effect on the color. Doesn't harm your kiln at all. It doesn't like fumigate into soft brick or anything like that. So, because you don't use that much. Like for this much, it might be just like like a teaspoonful. Because again, it is really thick when you get it like icing. So this, just so you can see the consistency. See how slow this is coming out? It is coming. There you go. See. So this is just actual ink. So if I'm using a blade, I would prefer it to be thick like this, so it has more body. So just think of this as replacing your water. Water is the vehicle in which the ceramic materials are suspended in. So if you let that evaporate out, it's not really suspended anymore. So you're adding the acrylic base now, so that way it's being more so suspended in this acrylic base, which is a vehicle that you need then to pull that across a screen. That gets on the thick side for using a sponge though. So and that's just called modifying a glaze. Now, when I do have some that are just already modified. So I would have, then I'd just have a label on there that just says, modified is all. So I like to have these square. I take everything out of bottles because things stack. I like these stacked just easier, right? And 3 bottles of anything just take up more room, so it's easy for me to stack stuff, and I can see color from the side. So that's all I do, and then I just keep them in here. If I know I'm not going to print for a little while, then I'll put saran wrap on top and then put the lid on, and then the saran wrap acts a bit like a seal, so it doesn't dry out as fast. If I know it's going to be like a month or so, then I put press and seal on it and then put the lid on, and the press and seal keeps it. I do that when I travel too. That's what we'll be doing at 4:30 is press and sealing all these guys. Because that way if it tilts or something, it's not going to come out with the press and seal on there. So I'm going to do on paper what I just mentioned on the newsprint. I'm going to print the black, and then after that I will, where did I put that screen? Then I'll print these color Spinsky. And that's when I first met James. So I was a student, as an undergrad, and lots of times Victor would have friends that would, come and visit, and then they would come to the studio, the ceramic studio, to a class and demo. So this was one of those occasions where, again, I was just an undergrad, and then James comes in, and we knew he was coming because Victor, let us know. So when he came, he did something similar to where he threw a really large platter with a double-walled lip, on it, and then he threw some double-walled vessels. So, of course, we were all really excited to see that. So once he left, then we were all, of course, trying to throw these big double-walled pieces they're just failing and flopping. But the important thing about his visit was, this was it had to be like the early, we didn't figure out a date, did we, James? I think it was like early 90s probably. But for me, I was, the only, black student in the ceramics program. So it was really important for me then, because when James came through, I was just brand new. And as lots of minorities, sometimes when you're in a program, sometimes you're the only minority in that program. So, or sometimes in art history classes, and things like that, you don't see, people who look like you doing things. So when James came through, what was nice is that, this wasn't, brought up or a thing or anything. It's just the presence sometimes. So when James came through, he's already professional, well-known, doing things, and, he took the time to spend with everybody, in there. But for me, it showed, it was an actual example of someone who looks like me being successful in clay. And I hadn't seen that before. So at first I didn't know what my, career paths were. I hadn't even really made a decision, is that even what I want to do, right? I mean, I was first learning, and I was starting to get really good at it, but it still hadn't had that kind of moment was like, okay, it's something that I know I can do, but do I feel like I have an opportunity to do, right? Because it's hard sometimes, if you're young and you're trying to set upon a path that, no one in your family has ever done, and you don't see anyone who looks like you that does that, and being an artist is hard anyway, so there's all these things as an artist that are challenges that we have to overcome anyway. So that was, for me, that was another thing that I had to kind of navigate. So it was really important for me, and it really, it was really inspiring to, for James to come in and see that, because that showed me that there was, I could be successful, because I had an example of someone who was. And so that's how I first met James. And then over the years, our paths have crossed for other things as well, and we just have a fortunate relationship now where, at first, he's like more of a mentor, and then he became a friend, and, and still is. So I'm very lucky to have the friendship that I do have with James. And I think, a lot of people have stories, like that. And that's when we come to Nsika, we get to share those and see each other. It's like a big family picnic once a year at times. So I'm going to let this continue to dry just a little bit more before I do the second color. Now with this, I want to do, so this is what's called spot color. And I think, just give a second, I think you can do an overhead. But, so what I'm going to do is line up the color that I want to do next. So I can go ahead and just do the skin tone. So can you see this from your angle?
This thing.
Okay. Here. So I just literally just line it up. Now, when I cut this, I cut it so the black line I could still see. I just cut it like sort of in the middle of the line, because I didn't necessarily want my color to go, outside of the outside line. So on clay, actually, it sticks a little bit to the surface, so it kind of seals a bit. Now, when I put the adhesive vinyl on, I did take a piece of the backing, and I rubbed the back a lot, so that way it got the adhesive to stick to the screen a little bit more. It's the edges that are the most important when you're doing this. Now, with a screen like this is not a permanent thing. In printmaking, this is just called printing flats. And it's a way to put a quick stencil into your screen and maybe get about a dozen or so prints out of it, and then you pull it off. So it's not meant to be permanent. It's not meant to last a long time. The more you wash it, the glue starts to break down. So this is something that's just sort of a quicker thing to do. But you can reclaim the screen. So it's always nice to have some open screens laying around. So what I like to do first is, like, I'm loading these up the same way I did the black. And I always like to do it on paper first, just to kind of see how much is coming out. Because if not a lot is coming out, I know there's not much absorbed in there. But if it seems to come out okay, then I know it's ready to go. Now, it's going to look different on paper than it does clay, but this is at least going to give me a sense of how things will ultimately look. Now, these lighter colors on white hopefully will show up okay. Now, I'm also getting used to how do I pull it. So if I pull too hard in this direction, it could come underneath the fingers and smear a little bit. So with these practice runs, I'm figuring out pressure, what's the thinness and thickness. Now, when you do a screen, you always want to grab it by the corner and pull it up at an angle. If you pull it straight up, it just sometimes pulls your edges up and stretches your material. So just slowly pull it up. Okay, I could have pressed a little bit more right there to get it through. But the important thing is that it's lining up. So I'm okay with that. And it's actually, kind of opaque. Now, I always say, again, there's never an emergency. So even though I missed that spot, what I can do is just wait for that to dry. I can just line this right back up and then just print it again. So it's never final with screening. You can go back in and address certain issues. Or I could have a color that's a little bit more transparent and maybe a lighter value, and then go on top of that. So that way this darker color will come through the lighter color that's on top, so I get more depth in the skin tone on there. It doesn't have to be just a flat color. I can think it just, you want to think like a painter when you're doing this. And I like to let them dry just a little bit before I wipe them out. Can I tell one quick story again, James? Do I got time for a story, or are you getting ready to fire up another one?
Let me see what's on the screen. Okay, I'll tell you a story about my mother and father. I give credit to my
We're going back and forth.
to my interest in visual things and spiritual things to my mother and father. My mother and father, they were makers. My mother made quilts, and so did my grandmother. And I have a collection of my grandparents
in case I
and my grandmother's
later.
quilts in my home. And my father and grandfather, they fashioned many of their own farm tools. So they were always supportive of me being an artist. I feel very unique that way. They never hesitated to support me. And my mother believed that the color of your clothes could influence your emotional state. She believed that red and orange would make you more alert and happy. And my father believed that by painting our house green, that it would ensure a good harvest. So if you can imagine 6 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls running around a green house, making mud castles and mud pies, that was my upbringing. So I feel very fortunate. And I think that all people are creative. You know, children wanting to draw, I think that's just part of our DNA. And what makes us an artist, or choose that term, artist, depends on some experience at an early age that makes them choose that and keeps that, or sparks that DNA in us that doesn't take it away from us. We all have that artist gene. We see it in the way we draw and all draw our names, the way we choose our clothes, the way we decorate our homes. So my experience was when my grandmother told me that I was going to be an artist and that she would buy my Big Chief tablets. So I feel real fortunate that way. And I've encouraged my children. My kids are both musicians. And they're very happy, and I feel real fortunate to have creative children. So what I'm doing now is I measured the feet by using this little circle that has divided lines so that I can very quickly measure the feet. And then I'm going to turn it over and add a coil and start a new piece. And I do it this way because, I could make it a different way, but I choose to make it this way. I like the severe curves, and I can get that by letting it stiffen up. And if you see the piece that is at the Weston, I have that severe shoulder. And I can do that by letting the piece stiffen and pull it in without it falling in. So that's why I do it this way. Okay, that's all.
James,
Yes.
might I interrupt and ask if you mind if I do a plug for your show in Beaumont?
Yes, go ahead.
If you are headed home south and west, go all the way down to I-10, the farthest south interstate highway in this country, and head west. Just barely west of the Louisiana border is a town called Beaumont. And we are lucky enough to have at the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, which is at mile marker 872 or something like that.
That's specific.
It's 20 miles into the state. But at any rate, get off at that very first Beaumont exit, head for the museum, which is open 7 days a week. It is free all of those 7 days. And there is a really dynamic exhibition of James' work that goes beyond the double-walled vessels into all of the exploration the man does on a phenomenal level with such depth and certainty of what he's looking for or what he finds that everybody needs to see that part too. But it's a great exhibition. It's free. It's fun. It's beautiful. If you're going that way, take a break.
Thanks, Helen. Appreciate it.
So how are we doing on time? Okay.
What is it? What's the time? 3 o'clock? Hey, is that Juan? Hey, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time.
So as I'm printing on paper, I'm just going to follow those steps, because as this light brown dries, because things are lining up okay, so I'm going to go ahead and, so you said it's 3? Okay. So the same thing happened yesterday. About 2 hours in, I finally actually started working on clay. but with these kinds of things, though, you do spend some time making the tools and things like that, but then you can have like an explosion of clay work afterwards, once you have your things done. So I like how that's going, so I'll go ahead and just print the same way. Now with a slab, you want to make sure that you smooth it out, because if there's any texture in the clay, then that's still going to be in your image. I just use these rubber ribs. Well, it's a stiff, this is a Mud Tools rib, but it's one of the platter ribs, so it's nice and stiff. So it works really well for scraping smoothing my slabs. Because I like it, it compresses the surface a little bit besides smoothing, and it's rigid all the way across as well. So it makes, really good tool for that. So I'm just going to put this on here. Now with clay, I can lightly rub it first, not pressing down hard. But since clay does have just like a touch of moisture, the screen sticks to it a little bit, and it doesn't do that with paper. So that does help. Now, the clay isn't quite as absorbent as the paper, so I do need to be a little more lighter-handed with this. Now, if you haven't printed, there's a question earlier about, getting started and things of that nature. Well, lots of times with printing, everyone tends to be, including myself, sometimes a little heavy-handed at first. So again, with screening, I can screen a little bit lighter, would not worry about overdoing it, because if I don't get an area, I can go back and fix that. And I try not to get those smears right out of the gate. So I'm just going to I'll print this, and I'm going to come back with the light brown, print that, do the mahogany there. So I'll kind of just be going back and forth on these two. Do you have a question?
I do. My question is for James, though, so I didn't want to interrupt if you were got more to tell us. Okay. James, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your glazing and firing process for the pieces that have the sort of metallic rainbow aspect to them.
Okay, it's called fuming, and I'm using gold and platinum luster. So it's a very expensive technique. Gold and platinum is very expensive. 100 grams costs $1,300. That's about a bottle like that. And I can use on a big piece, like the piece that's in the Weston, that's about $1,000 worth of gold. And so it's very expensive. So what I do, I have a formula, a glaze formula, and I glaze fire it, cone 05, and it comes out a metallic black. Then there are two ways that I fire them. Sometimes I just want a smooth surface like the pot that's on the poster for ceramics for Inseca post. Okay, so on that firing, I just fired it to cone 05 and it's smooth. All right. So then I take it out of the kiln and it's been fired to cone 05. I take baling wire, you know, baling wire. Let's see, it's also called, it's got another name.
Just the black steel wire? Like
Steel
stovepipe wire?
Yeah, but it's got another name too. Say it. Huh? Stove?
Stovepipe?
Stove wire? Yeah, okay. You buy it at Home Depot? Did somebody say something? Nichrome? No, not nichrome. I can't hear back there, but
Is there going to be a prize for the winner?
it's got another name too. But tire wire. That's it. Tire wire at Home Depot, but farmers call it baling wire. They use it to tie the bales of hay. Okay, but at Home Depot it's called tire wire. All right, so I get tire wire and I wrap the piece wherever I want lines or a halo. I wrap it. We passed some of the pieces. I wrap it with the wire. This is after it's been fired. Okay? Then I spray gold luster or platinum luster. And the gold luster and platinum luster is real expensive. So I use 3 parts gold to 1 part lacquer thinner. And that way I can extend the gold. And I use an atomizer. And gold has arsenic in it, so you don't want to breathe it. So I have an atomizer, and I put a mask on, and I put a hole in the mask, and I blow through it. And I blow all through it. And on my big pieces, I have one of those Chinese-made atomizers. They sell them. They used to sell them in the. You know what I'm talking about? Has anyone seen them in here? They do, because I want to get some. Okay, so I'll go do that. Are they going to be open tomorrow? No, so I got to do that today. What time do they close? 4:30. 4:30? Okay. So I got to do you know exactly where they are? In the middle? Huh? Yeah. I need 2. Yep. Like about, not the real big ones, the one that's about like this, the shorter ones, if they have them. The shorter ones about like this, 2 of them, okay. Okay, thank you. So, thank you. So I spray the gold luster, and the gold luster will give you gold. Platinum gives you really interesting colors too. It'll give you blues and purples. And then I let that dry overnight. If you try to put it in the kiln too early, it'll bubble. So I let it dry overnight. And there are lots of things that you can do to it, so you need to experiment. And then I fire it to cone 019 in my gas kiln. You don't want to do it in an electric kiln because it will burn out your elements. I let it cool down to 850 degrees. So your frame of success is between 900 and 800 degrees. I have a mask on, protective clothing, gloves, well-ventilated area, no people around, no animals around. Open the kiln up. I go in and I put a tablespoon of stannous chloride. I get it at U.S. Pigment on hot brick. I close the kiln. I close the damper. I run like hell. And I get out and I count to 60. And then I go back in and I pull the damper out and I let the fumes go out, and then I let it cool down, and then look inside and you see brilliance. You see, and these colors will stay forever. They won't fade.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I had a question for, oh gosh.
Paul.
Yes, Paul, sorry. I'm wondering, do you ever, when you're doing the screen printing on the paper, do you ever just take the paper and put it on the clay and then smudge that on there and use that so that it's inverted?
You can do that as well, yeah. So printing on newsprint, yeah, I am just creating a paper transfer, actually. So I don't do that just because, like, this is for paper transfers, and I do have a cylinder over there that I can, maybe use bits and pieces of these because I was going to screen on it just so you could see that. But with paper transfers, they're really good for, like, if you're going to collage onto a surface. It's not going to be quite as saturated because when you print onto this surface, then you're transferring what's on here to a new surface. So you don't always get everything out of the paper. But it does invert, it does flop your image as well. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't personally do it, but it is something that you can do with this. And I do it sometimes if I actually do this more in workshops to show folks. And that's just one of the nice things about screen printing, and there's so many possibilities with it that hopefully you can see some of the things that I'm doing, and then you just kind of take off with your own ideas about how you might apply it. But I like to let it dry a little bit more before I do the transfer. Then that way, when I put it onto the surface, you spritz it from the back, and then you burnish it. And then when you're burnishing it, you keep spritzing it, and then burnishing it, and then slowly peel it off. And then what you're doing with the newsprint is that it's releasing the underglaze into the surface as you burnish it.
Yeah, I was wondering because as you're putting the colors on top on the clay, it's covering up the outlines of the drawing, and I wasn't here from the beginning.
Oh, you mean
so
for
I don't
this
know
part
what your
here?
process is. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do that last. So, like, I did the outline first, and then these other colors now, I'm using that to line up my spot colors. Once I print this second color here, then I'm going to come over with black again to bring it all together. And with having black done twice, first and second, it makes the black outline a little bit richer too, because now I have 2 layers of that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
I have a question for James. Could you speak a little bit about the texture, the piece that you have at the gallery?
Okay, which one?
The gold one.
Okay, the gold one. Okay, that's another technique where it's the same glaze as the piece that's on the poster, the Insica poster, and the one that is on the cover of Ceramics Monthly. Same glaze. Okay, so fire to cone 05, and it comes out and it's a shiny black. All right? So then I wrap it in paper, and I put it inside of a metal container that I have made at a machine shop. It's made out of 1/16" black steel, and it has a lid on it that fits tight on the lid, on the pot. So I put that inside of either an electric kiln or a gas kiln, because the smoke doesn't affect the elements. So I put that in the kiln and I fire it to cone 017 and I hold it for an hour at 017. So you have to have a kiln that has the ability to hold for that long. And when you take it out of the kiln, the glaze will curdle. And I'm not sure why it does that, but I know that at 017, the glaze will still be strong enough. But if you go too much, the glaze bubbles, and when you touch it, it'll pop. Just testing. And I don't know why I realized that it would do that. I was just playing around, you know. I had an idea that the glaze would do something if I underfired it, you know. I don't know why. I just knew that it would do something. I get, you know, I had a teacher whose name was Karl Marx, M-A-R-T-Z, at Indiana University, and his motto was that everything does something. So I just do things, you know. I'll just say, well, let's do this. And so I started underfiring things and firing it in the sagger, and it came out one day, and I went, wow, boy, that's nice. So then I just started testing, you know, how many hours, how many minutes, and I came to 017 at 1 hour, and that's perfect, that works. But sometimes, you know, if I go a little bit too much, when you touch it, it'll go. So then, after that comes out, then I do the technique that I was telling her about, wrapping it in, that's the one that's at the Weston. It came out, curdled, then I wrapped it in the baling wire, or the tire wire, and then sprayed it with gold and fumed it. And then you got that. But I did an extra technique on that one. After I got it out of the kiln and it was curdled, I used automobile masking tape and taped a freeze around the top. And I sandblasted it. So I sandblasted the sheen off of the glaze. And then I put pure gold, without it being mixed with the lacquer thinner, on top of that. And I fired it without spraying the other gold, so that it was, you know, pure gold on top of that. And then I wrapped the piece in the wire and then sprayed the mixture of gold and platinum on top of that, so that there's a tiny bit of a difference between the texture. So it almost looks like a ghost image. So you have to look to see, but it's as if it's coming through, so there's something else going on. So I like that kind of little play. So if you're over there tonight, I can talk to you about it. Okay.
All right, here's my disclaimer. This is a slab wrapped around something. That's it. So it's horrible looking. Don't look at this. I'm just going to print on the surface. Just so, this is not how I start any of my work. Just, I don't know, like that piece there, that's not how these start. This is demo only. So yesterday, someone asked, you know, about using these screens vertically on a surface that's curved. So while this is drying, and, you know, I'm not going to mess with it because, you know, it's going all right, so that's good. If anyone's ever, you know, anyone who's ever taught, you hope it works the first time, but, you know, but it's actually looking okay. So once that's nice and dry, when I put this whole screen on, since this is touching a lot of different parts, I just want to make sure it's dry enough so I don't pull color up off the back of the screen when I put that black back on. So for this, like I said, I just wanted to make a vertical surface, and I wanted to show a couple, like 2 different things. Yesterday I was carving on this relief block, the Speedy Carve. So yesterday I went ahead and finished it, and, well, finished it mostly. I mean, it's good enough to proof. Where I'll roll this up and proof it, and I'll proof the other one. And then I have a larger block to do in that one as well. But this also curves. You know, a couple people were asking, can you take relief blocks and carve them on a curved surface? You can't do that with the linoleum blocks because they're too stiff. And if you do start to bend them, then they'll crack, and you don't want to do that. But with the Speedy Carve, it's nice. You know, you can fold it in half. It's not going to crack or break, so it's very durable. So what I have in here are a couple of small ones. You can kind of think of them as, and I'll just lay them out here because it might be easier to see. Like you can just do designs. There's a bird, a lighthouse, a horse, a tree, and a ram. I did not do all these last night. So, and then these are just some random, you know, if I have little pieces, then I just carve maybe like shapes or things. So with the Speedy Carve, these are nice where if you want to just have some small images, so instead of collaging things as paper transfers, you can just carve individual images and then, you know, collage your images. It's kind of like making your own stamps. So now to print these, the way that I rolled these up yesterday, you do the exact same thing. So what I'll do first is go ahead and print one of these screens on here. And again, this is a nice thing about using screens and then using the sponging method is that their pressure is the same for everything. So once you get used to the amount of pressure that you need to print something, then I'm not doing anything different here. Now the surface, this is a little bit wetter because this was from a fresh slab this morning, but all right, so I'm going to put this guy on here. So what I'll tend to do is run my fingers on it first, just to see, since it is a little damp, I don't know if that's, so am I holding this in a way where this can be seen, or do I need to? Okay. So since it is a touch tacky, it's sticking a little bit. So I want to start on one side and work my way over. Now, it's the same advice as before. You don't need to be heavy-handed with it. Like if it doesn't print as clean as you want, then just let it dry a little bit, and then you can just sight register and line it right back up and do it again. Or you can choose a completely different color and line it up and move it just a touch and print that new color. Then the black looks like a drop shadow on it. You know. Or you could just take that color, put it on top of the black, and then the black just comes through the color. So just with one simple image, you know, you can just print it as a line image, use it as a drop shadow, or layer your colors, again, to get a depth of color to have something coming through. So let me go ahead. Now, the level of difficulty for this one, for me, is I can't see this, and it's upside down, and I'm doing it from the back. So we'll see. But I want you to be able to see it. All right.
Hi, Bobby.
Now I can cheat it just a little bit. That's okay. All right. Just 2 people? This was hard. All right. I'll keep going.
I have a question for both of you. You both have pretty long careers, both not only as students but also as teachers. I was wondering if you could speak to any of the qualities that good teachers had that were encouraging or helpful, and what your own approach to teaching has been.
Okay. Can I go first?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll tell you an experience that affected the way I teach. I went to the Kansas City Art Institute, and my friend Bobby went also out there. My teacher was Ken Ferguson, and Ferguson was a good teacher, but he had a coarseness about him. And when I went there, I could throw already, and so I could make big pots. And I thought I was going to be a star. That's what they call the students who were good and that he liked, stars. So on my first critique, I'd worked really hard, and I'd made these big pots. And when we had our critique, I was puffed up, and I thought I was going to get a good critique, and he just tore me to pieces. And when we would have our critiques, they would have a big bin filled with water in the critique room, and if he didn't like your work, you'd have to put your pots in the bin, and you watch them dissolve into the water. And sometimes people would leave the studio and they never come back. Any Kansas City Art Institute students out there? No? And so that day, I was distraught. I didn't think I could make it. But I came back to my home, and I listened to John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, and that album gave me a feeling that I could be okay. I could do it. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. A love supreme. A love supreme. And so I went back, and I realized that what he said was correct. You know, they wiggled and they wobbled and they were too heavy and they were ugly. Because he said they were big old ugly pots. So I said, okay. So my next critique, my work was a lot better. And then the next critique, they were better and better. But when I started teaching, I would make a sandwich. I would start out with a positive thing. I would find something. I would say, man, you really worked hard, man. I'm really proud of how well you worked. Young lady, you really worked hard. That was great. And then I would go into something critical. And then at the end, I would end with something positive. I can see that you're going toward something that's going to be really good in this next work that you're going to come up with. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. And I call it a sandwich. And it gives them a sense of self-worth at the end. And that's my way of teaching. Okay.
Okay, I have two questions, one for each of you.
Oh, he didn't answer that one. He let him have.
I am so sorry.
I can say I do what he does.
It's all about me.
Do you really?
All right, here's what, I had a similar experience, but with Jim Tanner. So Jim Tanner, he's like a father figure to me, Jim. And like I said, I got my undergraduate with Victor Spinski. And then when I graduated, I wanted to go to grad school. And Victor was like, no, you're ready, but I want you to go study with Jim Tanner for a year. And I was like, well, okay, well, where does he teach? And he's like, Mankato State University in, southern Minnesota. I was like, where? Because again, I grew up in Delaware, and my world was the Delmarva Peninsula. Far south is maybe Virginia, up to New York, and no reason to go further west than Pittsburgh, growing up, and Maryland. So that's where I was for the first 28 years of my life, and I had no idea what Minnesota. I know where it was. We had a map and all, but I was like, okay. But the reason he wanted me to go, he said, I can give you all the technical advice I can. He goes, but Jim Tanner at the time, I think he might have been president of NCECA then as well. But he said, and this is where, I guess it's a double story about teaching. Victor always put my best interests first. And that's a lesson that I learned from him. And he wanted me to go study with Jim Tanner because he said, I can prepare you technically and conceptually to be in the ceramic art world and the art world, but I can't let you know what's going to be like as a black artist and how you navigate a career like that. So he wanted me to go study with Jim Tanner to kind of learn that. He felt very strongly that when you go to grad school, you know, whatever walk of life you were from, it was good to maybe study with a person from that same walk of life, right? Because those are the footsteps you're actually following and kind of figuring out how you are going to do your way. So I went out there, but I still had to apply and all that, right? So I applied, I got in, and I was very excited, and I got to Minnesota, and I was just getting ready to move in my little studio apartment. So I went to the McDonald's to get something, and they said, so I just ordered, and they said, do you want a Coke? And I was like, sure. And then got that, and they said, you want a sack? I'm like, what? So they call like bag, sack. Somebody said oofta, and I was like, what's that mean? So there's all these things in the Midwest in Minnesota that were very different. So that was also part of going to grad school. But so we have our first critique. I spent, you know, weeks making a piece, and the grads were having one-on-one critiques for our first ones to get used to things. So I was a huge David Smith fan as an undergrad. So I was making these large rectilinear pieces that I was like sliding down these poles that I would weld, and I had all these stains and slips on them, you know, fired 2 or 3 times. You know, they're like 8 feet tall, and if you're familiar with the Cubi series of David Smith, that was the feat that I worshipped that sculpturally. I just love that aesthetic. So I built this piece, and then so sitting down there with Tanner, and he goes, you know, he's just sitting there very quiet. He says, you know, so tell me about your piece. So I'm just like laying my heart out with this hat. I was just so excited to be in grad school, and all these things that this piece meant, and I had all these feelings put into it. And he's just, you know, quiet the whole time, listening. And then, you know, sometimes he would, you know, eat a piece of garlic, if anyone's ever had Tanner. So I'm all done, and he goes, okay. He goes, that's bullshit. And then he left. That's my first critique. So I was like, so am I done now? So then the next day I saw him, and he calls me into the office, and he's like, look, he goes, what you made was great. What you said was great. He said, but what you're making doesn't reflect what you're saying. He goes, what you need to do is all that emotion and all of that passion you had about what you were making, that vehicle isn't the right car for that. He goes, you need a different vehicle for that. And he goes, that's why you're here, is to do something that you feel you have permission to do. I have no expectations of what you make. You don't have to make a better version of what you used to do as an undergrad. You're here to learn, grow. And I found that was really interesting, because sometimes, and it might have been a little bit like that with you, James, where, you know, as a grad student anyway, you do need that kind of just flat feedback where, you know, it's just that like honesty, you know, but it's again followed up. This was just a one slice sandwich. It started with a nice and end.
An open sandwich.
Yeah, it was an open sandwich. But that moment, I was like, you know what? I can do whatever I want. And then all that stuff I said, it really wasn't in that piece, because that's why you talk so much, because you're like trying to speak it into being, right? And it just wasn't that. And then my other quick Tanner story is I was glazing. And then Tanner came up behind me, because his office was off the studio. And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm glazing. He's like, no, you're not. Then he walked away. I'm like, because studying with Tanner is like studying with Yoda, right? So I was used to it at this point. So I'm still going away, and he comes back, and about half an hour later, what are you doing? He's like, I'm glazing. He goes, no, you're not. Because I was like, okay. I'm trying to figure out, what am I missing here? So this happened about 3 or 4 times. And then finally he comes back, and he goes, okay, put that down. He goes, describe step by step, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm picking up a brush, put it in this glaze, brushing it off the surface, and he's like, that's painting. And then he walks away. And then he comes back another half hour later with like this $65 blue squirrel hair brush. And he goes, He goes, when you're dressing a surface, you have to dress it like a painter. You can't think, he goes, an oil painter doesn't say they're oiling. An acrylic painter doesn't say they're acrylicing. So as a ceramic artist, you don't say you're glazing. Glaze, it's a material, it's a medium that you're brushing across the surface. So once you start taking your materials and your colors seriously and investing money into good brushes and everything, then your surfaces are going to be richer and better, and they're going to be even more considered. And so that was the sandwich gave me that also. I still have that brush, obviously, and so that was, very powerful for me. And then this is another harsher reality, because then the next day he goes, I got your teaching assignment for the spring. And I was like, oh, good. I'm going to, be teaching clay or 3D. And he was like, well, he goes, we were talking, and it sounds like you need more work with, 2D design, composition, color, et cetera. I was like, yeah, I'm going to really focus on that this semester. He goes, yeah, because I'm having you teach 2D design in the spring. I'm like, oh, I can't teach 2D design. He goes, if you teach 2D design, you'll never be more focused on line, value, color, et cetera. You're going to have to be one lesson plan ahead of your students. He goes, so that's what you're teaching in the spring.
Wow.
Yeah. But now my work is all about composition, color, layering. So it's a different touch with an undergrad versus a grad in terms of, but he was very much about saying yes to opportunities before you're ready for them, because you figure it out as you do it. You just want to be prepared for an opportunity and say yes. So my teaching style is a little bit of both with that. I try to pay attention to what my students need, and then I try to let them make mistakes so that I can help them understand what their mistakes are, and then correct them, and then kind of with the sandwich technique come like something positive, but I do like to let my students sometimes not wander way off in the wrong direction, but enough so that when I do give them feedback, they know why the feedback I'm giving them is important. I don't want to stop them before they do it, because then they don't remember what they shouldn't do, because they never got to the point where they're like, okay, that was heading in a bad direction. But I do think the more you can get one-on-one relationships with all of your students as best as possible and find out what their weaknesses and strengths are, so you can help them. That's sort of my style of teaching, is I try to be individual with all of them as much as I can, like Victor and Tanner were with me. All right.
Okay, I'm back. I apologize for stepping on you, Paul. My questions I have two, one for each of you, and they're very simple. One is, we want to know how to dry the slabs, Paul.
Excuse me?
How we dry the slab completely. That's one question after you print it. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is for James. As I'm watching you work on your form, I'm thinking about how I throw. And I know that when you threw the base, it was really nice. And I want to know when the S-crack curve comes in the bottom.
Which of this?
This one right there, the little one, because you've flipped it over, and I've watched you work the bottom of it on the other side, and then the top, and I'm just having memories of me throwing.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Well, I usually don't have S-cracks, because I learned that when you're making a platter, if you center it and you go this way, and then you go this way. So I was told that if you crisscross, where are you?
I'm right here.
Okay, if you crisscross those molecules, by pushing this way with the rib, and then going back this way with the rib, and back this way with the rib, and just really pressing it like that, you won't get them. So I don't get them.
Okay, so when you flipped it over.
When I flipped it over, what I was doing, it sagged because I'm working too fast, and it sagged, and I'm trying to push it back in so that it's not sagging at the bottom. I'm working in a different way than I normally would work. I'm working too fast, and the clay is too wet. So that's what I was doing. I'm trying to save it, but I don't know if I will be able to. But that's what I'm doing.
So when I dry slabs, I just put them between 2 pieces of drywall and then just let them dry for about a week. So having them in drywall keeps them, they shrink in and it keeps the ends from curling. And I mean, that's really the only secret, just like a straight tile maker. I will put wax paper below and above when I do that. So the relief print, printed fine, so you can kind of see how they're nice and flexible. You just sort of just roll it over the surface, and then you just let it dry. So it is a nice way that you can kind of collage again with those. I did want to do a bigger print.
Can I ask a question real quick? I'm over here.
Me or James?
You, Paul, please.
Okay, sure.
You put the wax paper above the drywall, like sandwich.
No, so you have the drywall, put down a piece of wax paper, then I put my slab on there, and then I'll put wax paper on that and put the drywall on top. So the clay slab is protected by wax paper.
Okay, so you're not really absorbing anything into the drywall?
No, because the drywall actually pulls moisture out of it a little faster than I want.
Yeah.
So I just have it wax paper above and below. And the drywall is actually just the weight, so it doesn't curl. And then I let it dry from the side.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Figuring because I know we're getting to the end. I have 3 things to do. Let me cut the walls off of these. I can get all this done in the time we have allotted. So once it's set up like this, then I just cut the walls off. Those of you who were here yesterday, I was cutting it early, so some of the slip was sagging off. So I'm cutting these walls off so that way I can now pull these monoprints. Now, I'm not going to pull it right away. I'll let it dry from the side just a little bit now as well. So when that cycles back, I really haven't talked about my work at all, because I'm focusing more on technique and thing. But there's going to be some images towards the end, a little bit after this, where if you saw some images of just one should be of like the sky with trees, and so there's the kind of work that I like is stylized work, and with that, with Botticelli, I like that kind of elongated finger, the mixture of mythology and Christianity in terms of the kind of stories that he worked with, and then you'll see like Jacob Lawrence I have in there. One of the first pieces of art that I ever saw was, I think, after this one, and does everyone know what I'm talking about? Have they seen it yet? But Botticelli is an artist that I like to look at, compositionally. Because, artists who use a lot of iconography, symbols. Kerry James Marshall, he's a Chicago artist. I like the way all of my figures and everything are black and brown, because that's a way for me then to, again, someone can go to a museum and look at artwork and see people depicted that look like them. And that's something that Kerry James Marshall very much does, and that was an art. So this is my introduction to art, because I watch Good Times, right? So the first artist I ever seen, black artist, was J.J. Walker, right? So that was art to me. That's the only artist that I saw. So, Sugar Sack, I loved that piece. That always started the show, right? And then, of course, Jacob Lawrence. So you can see, like, the workers where, like, bigger hands, and that's sort of where you see the reference with even this, where even, like, biggers, like, sometimes the emphasis is on the hands or the work, so that stylistically, I like that kind of work. And speaking of that, I'll just go ahead and print that while I'm standing here. And I like, the use of tools and things. So these were some of the more direct references that, that I do like. I like a lot of other artists as well, but I feel like those have been, in terms of art history goes, the ones that I found that I could look at and say, hey, I don't want to make work like them, but that's sort of the problem that I'm trying to solve too, is that type of work. So I found those as good examples. So that's, so that one has the most iconography in there. That's sort of based, like everyone's studio is kind of like their home, right? So that's a bit of a family portrait, that one. But so towards the end, I do look at nature too. You know, I love to go camping, I love to hike, and like we just love being outdoors. So for me, references are just taking pictures outside. So when I start to make images that need outdoor references of trees or skies or things like that, I take pictures, right? I just go through my photos of camping or being in a park, and that's sort of my, nature is my inspiration for those types of things. And then there's going to be some images that'll come up that'll have an image of, being outside, and then it'll have an image that utilized that reference in one way. So we'll see how this black outline looks.
Paul, can we put an image on this platter? Is there anything that we can do that's real quick?
That worked.
I have a platter that doesn't want to be what I want it to be.
It's not cooperating?
Yep. So let's improvise, make something.
I can put my potter on your pot.
Okay.
Yes. Or did you want to do it? You want to print it?
Let me clean this up, and then.
Oh, you just.
I'm
going to put it here to the side, and when you're done, then I got a glove for you. I got the ink all ready to go.
James, while you're cleaning that, I had a question. Your other pieces had looked like added forms to them on the top. I don't know if you call them handles or heads. Or
I call them appendages.
Appendages?
Yeah.
Of course. And so how do you make those? And what's the, can you tell us a little bit about the process?
Okay. So what I do is I could make them with molds, but I don't because I enjoy making them each individually. And so I make them solid, and then I cut them in half, hollow them out, then put them back together, and then put them on. So they're hand-built. And they're reference to birds, Canadian geese, and in some cases, sandhill crane. Where I live, we have bird sanctuaries, so the birds come there during the winter. And I like to go out with my dogs, and we play in the lakes. We have what they call playa lakes. Have you ever heard of those? Playa lakes are, in that area, we used to have thousands and thousands of buffalo. And the buffalo would...
let it get away from me.
What they would call wallows, buffalo wallows. And so they would leave low impressions in the land. And then during the rainy season, they would fill up with water. And when you fly over West Texas, over that land, there would be thousands of little lakes. And then they dry up in the summer. And the birds come and they migrate there during the winter. So I go out and I photograph the birds and I look at them and I draw them. And so that's where that interest comes from.
I had a question for Paul. Hi.
Hello. I'm in
Is
the
it-
dark now.
And maybe you already answered this. Is there a reason why you're screen printing with a sponge?
With a sponge, it's easier to print on a clay surface lots of times with a sponge because it'll conform to the surface. When you use a squeegee, then it prints on all the high spots, and you might even be able to see from where you are here, like this slab is not perfectly flat, right? So it would miss some spots where it's like little dips and things. So with using a sponge, it makes sure that if there's a slight dip or something, the screen will kind of go with that when I use a sponge. Now, if it's kind of a larger print, then sometimes I will use a squeegee, or if it's a lot more detail, then I might use a squeegee so I can use a bit more pressure. But both work equally. Some people only use a squeegee. So a lot of it is also just personal preference. For me, it's simple. You know, I can just get things a little thick and then pour with them, or rather pour them and then print them, you know, right away. And I don't have to modify things as much, so I don't have a specialty underglaze set aside only for one purpose. This is going to be like degrees of okay. So, because I'm not going to proof this block, I'm just going to go ahead and print it. This slab got away from me a little bit. It's a little firmer than I wanted it to be. But I did want to show, like this is one of the prints. Like this is the one, I think they use it a little bit. This is the block for like the screen printing one. So it's just a big relief block. And then I printed this on the plaster bat, and then I did that process with those monoprints that I showed over there. So I was just going to ink this up and then print this on the slab. I know already it's going to be a little wonky because that slab's not flat, but you know, everything does. Those things worked over there, so I'm okay with things being just sometimes so. So the more important thing is I want you to see the process, which is always the important thing.
Paul, I have a question just regarding your screen printing as well. What is your mesh size?
Anywhere from 60 to like 220 works fine.
And how do you choose between 60 and 220?
Just whatever's available.
Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. All of that works just fine. Are you ready to print, James?
Mm-hmm. So take a look at this. Can something be printed on this?
Yeah.
On that? And does it need to be drier?
Just let me get let's see. Let me just wipe it a little bit. I feel like I'm defiling your vessel here.
That's good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to be... Okay, I'm like in my own light. I'm just flattening this out a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of why I use a sponge to print. Because it's not a flat surface here. So...
You think?
Did you want me to give you some
advice? Yeah. This is.
I don't know if my gloves will fit you.
You had said that we could do a collaboration. So
yeah, you got to throw that on me. 15 minutes for we're all done. How about this? You're throwing them.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
All right. But you gonna print it?
Yeah, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
What? Okay. So
let me clean my hands. Do we have water here?
I got a bucket over here.
Okay.
I have a question for Paul.
Here's a bucket, James.
Okay.
Or well, I guess you're closer to that one. Yeah. Never mind. Question?
Yeah. So I've tried like the easy screens and stuff, and I'm really not good at printing on the clay surface. And I was really hoping that you would have like an error or something where it goes behind the screen, and then like how do you like recover from that so that you can immediately use the screen again without it having that error like that's already splotched on the back of the screen? And
well, Well, that's just called bleeding. So if you print and then the color bleeds under the screen, that means you weren't making full contact with the surface. So if it's on clay, then that means like what's going to potentially happen over here is that it's kind of the surface moves a little bit. So if you're not making constant contact, the material's still going through. So it just makes you just simply wipe off the back of the screen and the front, let it dry, and then the clay surface you can just scrape off and just start again. But that's actually a common thing that happens a lot. I mean, it's just one of those things you just get a better feel for. Oh, I had one. Now these are.
I just need one?
Yeah, because, I mean, you can have two if you want, the whole bag.
Left or right, or does it matter?
Yes, either one.
Okay.
Like I said, they're, you know.
I think this might not fit me. Okay. This is like the Japanese. It's like the Japanese shoes.
Put your hand on my hand. Look. You gotta get the other one. Look.
It's like when I was in Japan, whenever I'd go into a museum, I'd have to take my shoes off and put on the little Japanese shoes. And so I would have to walk around like this. Okay.
Well, this would be fine. So we'll just put it right in the middle.
Okay.
And then, look at that, is a little bendy. You got a nice fan. I don't have a fan over there. This is the luxury side. So maybe we'll put it to the side a little bit.
Okay.
That hits a little better.
Yeah.
So just the way I'm moving my fingers like this.
Mm-hmm. I could put two.
Just do that with the sponge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So.
Oh, I see.
So just kind of wipe it on the side to get the excess off. Now you're supposed to use the hand with the glove. Well, let's see what's going on with the sponge. All right.
Okay.
Just wipe a little more off. Just a little bit more like it. Yeah.
Wipe a little bit off?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then keep your fingers up there, too. Get a little bit of pressure. There you go. Don't press too hard. All right. All right. Just a little bit there. All right, I think that might, let's take a peek.
Cool.
Yep, good enough.
Okay. Let's do one over there.
Can I do that over there?
Yeah.
Let me wipe this off real quick. So one nice thing about this is that you can print multiple times in a row. You just have to wipe off the excess. So maybe what we can do is reverse it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
All right.
That's cool.
Alrighty, so as long as you can see through it again, then stuff should go through. Mm-hmm. So I have it going like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this time not maybe quite as hard.
What is this material made out of?
This is the Amico LUG black, the black underglaze. Just right out of the bottle.
And the screen, what's it made out of?
This is a 200 mesh screen, and it's a UV sensitive photo emulsion. Oh, so go ahead and do that area a little more. And the nice thing about these screens is you can peek and see how you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Nope. Needs a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's looking good. All right, let's see. Is that enough here? Or just a little bit on his neck? All right, that's good. Just a touch right at the top of that. All right, I think we got it. Yay! There we go.
All right. Save the day.
I should have gave you 2 gloves. Can you get there? I need to rip that glove off. That might be on there forever.
Thanks.
Now, so to top that finale.
I have a question for Paul, right here.
Oh, yes.
So when you're doing an underglaze transfer instead of silk screening directly onto the pot, have you found a way to make that work on a dry surface, either a bone-dry pot or, say, over underglaze that's already on the pot?
Talking about paper transfer?
An underglaze transfer. So when you're printing underglaze onto newsprint or rice paper and then transferring that onto the pot, but onto a dry pot, so not using slip.
Is it green? Is it greenware, like bone dry?
Yeah, greenware, either bone dry or it could be leather hard, but maybe, maybe you've done an underpainting with underglaze, which essentially makes the surface more dry.
Paper transfers are pretty versatile in the sense that even if it's more dry, like once it gets to be bone dry, then the porosity just isn't, you would think it'd be more porous, but if it gets to be bone dry, then when you add water to it, it just starts to slake down the surface. So once it gets past like the later stages of leather hard, then it's a little bit harder to use because you need so much water spritzing the back to make the transfer that you end up re-wetting the clay too much. So I typically don't, if I did a paper transfer, the leather stages of late leather would be the latest in that drying process that I would do it. It sticks okay to bisqueware but as long as it's bisqued at a lower temperature, so the clay itself is still porous enough.
Okay.
It's all about the surface that you're on having the ability to wick water. If it doesn't have the ability to wick water anymore when you're wetting the newsprint, it doesn't draw into that surface that you want it to go onto.
So if you were to be transferring onto a leather hard pot, but on top of underglaze already on the pot, you
That's
think
fine.
just
Yeah, you can screen over top of an underglaze. That's fine.
Well, not screening over an underglaze, but transferring an underglaze transfer from paper to the pot.
Yeah, if you have a pot that you put something on already, then as long as the surface again is sort of receptive to that. So, seems like your question is very specific.
It is, and it,
sometimes those kind of questions are hard to
do
answer.
when I've tried to do it. So I just wondered if that was something that you had tried, and did you sort of have any insight into that?
I don't do a ton of paper transfers because there's not as much material to transfer sometimes. So when you get to those really drier conditions, it makes it more difficult because then you have to wet it even more to transfer. And then that's where the clay surface gets a little slurry on it. So that's why leather hard is really good. Past that, it can be done, but it just gets a little trickier.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, so this is big enough where I can do a quick proof of this, but it's probably like 4 o'clock now, isn't it? Okay. I got time. I'm just going to do it once because it's more about the process. That one worked, which I was impressed. Oh, I still need to get that one done. All right, so I just do a little extra. Where'd James go? All right, so this will go face down, start on one side. So when it comes to clay, I just want to make sure it's not pressing, just making sure it's in place.
Paul, while you're doing that, can you remind us what that was made out of?
This is made out of wood.
Okay.
And then I put plastic on the faces of the wood to protect the face from the clay because I also use this to print on paper.
Okay. And the Speedy Carve pieces that you had, what do you carve that off with?
I'll show you. Okay. So with the way that this works is when this comes down, this has a floating top plate. So that's what makes it different from a clamshell. So with this floating top plate, it can settle down flat on there. So no matter how thick the slab is, it's going to be okay. And then this comes down here, and then these bars are under here, like the smaller one. But then the second handle comes down here. So now when I press down, all the pressure's in the middle. So we'll see how it does. Because lots of times the first print, isn't a good one because I'm figuring out, that's where you kind of figure all your pressure out and everything. But since we're pinched for time, I just wanted to use it. I brought it all this way to use it once. So the same thing, just kind of peel it off slowly. Okay. About as good as can be expected. Can you see that? Okay. Up here, I could have had maybe a little bit rolled it up. Oh, I'm getting my shirt dirty. I don't mind getting dirty, but I don't buy my own clothes. My wife does, and if I get them dirty, then I'm in trouble. So, was that recorded? Because if she hears that, then I'm in more trouble. Yeah, it's too late. So, you see where this dip is right here? So this is the same thing with the screen. If you're using a press or if you're using a squeegee, then if your slab isn't perfectly flat, then that void isn't going to get done. So that's why there's a little dip right there. But the nice thing about this, typically I'll hand print them, which comes out fine too. But with using a press, I have equal pressure all over. So the color is nice and even everywhere. So with this, it's like Inception, right? It's like me printing a print of me throwing a pot. And then, so here is just different things. This is a slab roller. You want some other colors?
I just want to do some brush work on it.
Do you need some brushes?
Here's some. Can I use these?
But do you want a bigger brush?
No, I think
Yeah, you can use whatever you want.
Okay.
Want more gloves?
No.
Oh, I need to pull those prints. I just wandered around aimlessly now.
We got 6 minutes.
All right, so let me pull one of I'll just use these. All right, so at the end of every workshop, I always ask, did I do everything I said I was going to do? I feel like I did, but so I just, this is not how I normally do it, but typically I would put wax paper on and then put the bat, but this would be fine for flipping these. So I'm just going to take one of my plastic bats. So there's just the black and white one. This is a white body, so I guess it gets much brighter when it's fired. It's not what I normally use. Ooh, okay, and that's the one that has color. So you can see the difference. So with the color, I'm able to isolate areas. And remember how, if you were here earlier, when I just painted that whole color right here, but since the eyes are already printed, then, that color is then behind it since it's from foreground to background. So, all right, so that is James Island, Crisfield, Maryland, with that sunset coming down, that kind of like orange glow at night. This is on the Chesapeake Bay. Anybody from that area, Chesapeake Bay? You know where Crisfield is? Okay. So see that gold up top? That's kind of referencing that kind of golden glow. So one of the most inspiring things that we all can ever have is just nature, right? You want anything else, James?
See?
Oh, okay. did want to do, because I was up last night doing it, so I want to see what she looks like. I carved this a little bit more, so I do want to proof it to see where it is. Do I have like 1 minute? Well, you say that, but there's a group of people in back. So I was talking yesterday about when you're carving lino, one of the things that you can do is proof. Right? You don't have to carve and be done. So, well, if I theoretically can do whatever I want, I'm going to do both of them because I want to see what. So that's me and Jane. Jem is always my wife, and there we are, right there. So they're not self-portraits, but I make work about who I know when I put the characters in. So she's also not going to like this on tape either.
That's it.
So I'm going to print both of these, but I will do it. I just hid my Baron. Here we go. So I'm going to roll both of these up pretty quick. I just want to see what the carving looks like. So yesterday I used that one gouge that was a thinner gouge, and then last night I went in because I wanted to open the face up just a little bit to start to have some difference in line quality of the hair and the face. Now ultimately this is going to be profiled. So when you're printing with a Baron, just roll it up, put your paper down, and then with the Baron, just lightly rub the surface to print. And same thing, I can kind of pull it back a little slow and see. Okay, so not bad. That still needs to open up more. But with this process, with doing it this way, I can see what's happening slowly. I don't have to finish my print right away. So with these are twins, Ara and Ari, A-R-A, A-R-I. Their full names are Mayara and Mayari. And they're new. So that's something about yesterday. As I'm making characters or people and personalities, I have to get to know them. So I do some writing about, like, I'll write little short stories about them and kind of work out the character, what they do, and they're always representational of something else. Like stand-ins, metaphors, and this is just sort of like not quite a yin and yang kind of thing, but there's always, as far as twins go, what it means for two people to be close, and like there's other things in it, but this is sort of a way for me to explore that kind of a relationship. I mean, I don't have a twin, nor actually do I know any twins, but as an idea and a concept about, two people. They're the same person. Have you ever seen them together? Yeah, they're always together. I know. Anyway, why did you bring that up? I was this close to being done and not being. All right, as long as tomatoes don't start coming this way. But anyhow, some people just get so close, they're like Kyle and Kelly. But so it's an interesting concept where I want to have these two personalities as one that I'm kind of working into something. So I'll carve these, a lot of different versions of it. So this one I wanted to have where it's kind of coming together here, slightly different features, and I'll keep doing variations of it. Okay, where'd my Baron go? Okay. So these are just printed the same way. So this one I started just a little bit yesterday. So this one is, carved a little bit more fully. And again, this is just a proof, because these I'll keep working on. Hope I kind of. All right, so this is just a rolling thing. When I was rolling it, I didn't roll quite enough there. But it gives me a sense of what's going on with my line work. So I know I have more to do in the faces, but when you're doing faces, I like to kind of sneak up onto what I want to be the final part. So I'll carve a little more proof, carve a little more proof, and then finally I have it the way I want it. So, all right, that's it.
Big thank you to both Paul and James. I know we've all enjoyed them concluding the day. Thank you guys for coming back.
Thank you.
Thank you.